buy one, get one free. But the rancher didn't hesitate, he took both Apache. His ranch, a modest but hardworking place, was home to dozens of cattle, a few goats, and a handful of dogs that were more family than pets. Life for Tom was simple, grounded in routines he had developed over years of work, waking at dawn, checking the fences, feeding the animals, and making sure every corner of the ranch ran smoothly. One crisp morning, Tom decided to take a rare walk into the heart of town. The sun had just begun to warm the earth, turning the morning dew into tiny, sparkling jewels across the grass. He loved these walks. They were short escapes from the constant responsibilities of the ranch. The streets of Red Valley were quiet, save for the occasional clatter of a wagon or the low murmur of townsfolk greeting one another. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and news traveled faster than the wind. As Tom strolled down Main Street, his eyes caught sight of a large, colorful sign in front of the trading post. Buy one, get one free Apache horses. The letters were bold and almost shouted at him, their bright colors contrasting sharply with the muted tones of the wooden building. He paused, squinting against the morning sun, and let a slow smile spread across his face. A buy one, get one free deal was rare enough on groceries, let alone on horses. Curiosity tugged at him, and with a slow, deliberate step, he made his way to the trading post. The trading post was a small but bustling place, filled with the scent of hay, leather, and the faint aroma of baked goods from the bakery next door. The wooden floor creaked under Tom's boots as he approached the stall. Behind it stood Mr. Collins, a wiry man with a sharp smile and eyes that seemed to see through everyone. He had the look of a man who had spent his entire life trading and bartering, understanding the value of both people and goods in ways few others could. "Morning, Tom," Mr. Collins called, his voice carrying over the sound of neighing horses. "Just in time. Got a deal you won't believe today. 2 Apache horses, buy one, get one free. Take a look, see if you're brave enough." Tom chuckled softly. He had heard of Apache horses before. They were known for their strength, intelligence, and stubborn streaks that could challenge even the most experienced riders. The thought of handling one wild horse was enough to test anyone's patience, yet here was a deal offering 2. Most people in town would have walked away, shaking their heads at what they would see as foolishness. But Tom had never been afraid of challenges. He stepped closer and finally saw the horses. They were magnificent. The first had a coat as dark as midnight, sleek and shiny, with muscles rippling beneath its skin as it shifted nervously in its stall. Its eyes were sharp and alert, reflecting a mix of intelligence and mischief. The second horse was lighter, with a chestnut brown coat and a fiery temperament. Its mane was wild, flowing like flames, and it stomped its hooves impatiently, letting out a snort that made Tom laugh. "These are no ordinary horses, Mr. Collins said, leaning against the stall with a knowing grin. "They've got spirit. They'll test your patience, but if you can handle them, they'll be loyal beyond measure. Most folks don't dare take both. Most folks don't dare take one." Tom didn't flinch. He had worked with stubborn cattle, wild goats, and even a few temperamental mules, and he knew that patience, consistency, and understanding could tame almost any animal. He walked slowly along the stall, observing the way each horse moved, the subtle shifts in their expressions, and the quiet moments where their curiosity got the better of them. The townsfolk had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual sight of Tom, considering a deal too wild to be true. Children whispered to each other, pointing, while older ranchers muttered under their breath, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Tom noticed all of it but didn't let the crowd sway his decision. For him, this wasn't about showing off or proving a point. It was about recognizing an opportunity and knowing whether he could rise to meet the challenge. He crouched slightly, letting the horses get used to his presence. The darker horse approached first, sniffing his boots, its nostrils flaring with curiosity. Tom extended a hand, letting the horse smell it before giving it a gentle pat. The horse flicked its ears and nudged him back softly, a quiet test of trust. The chestnut horse stamped its hoof, letting out a loud neigh, and for a moment it seemed as though it was sizing Tom up, deciding whether he was worthy of its attention. Tom smiled. "Brave animals," he said quietly, mostly to himself. "I like that," Mr. Collins chuckled. "Brave, that's one word for them. Dangerous, stubborn, and smart enough to get under your skin. But take them both and you'll have the pair of a lifetime." Tom looked at the two horses, then back at the trader. His mind wasn't racing. It was steady, calculating, and full of quiet confidence. He had faced many challenges in his life, and this, he knew, was just another. Without hesitation, he extended his hand to shake on the deal. The townsfolk murmured in surprise. They had expected him to pick one, maybe the calmer one, and leave the other behind. But Tom had never been one to choose the easy path. With the deal made, Mr. Collins handed over the reins, and the horses were led out of the stall. Tom walked alongside them, feeling their strength and energy as they adjusted to their new surroundings. He could sense that the real work was only beginning, but he was ready. As he walked back toward his ranch, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the valley and illuminating the long trail ahead. Tom knew that in a few hours the horses would be at his ranch, and the real test of patience, understanding, and skill would begin. But in that moment, he felt a sense of excitement that had been missing from his daily routine. Life on the ranch was predictable, steady, and sometimes dull, but today was different. Today was the start of a new adventure. As he rounded the bend leading out of town, he glanced back at the trading post one last time. The sign still stood, bright and bold in the morning sun. Tom couldn't help but laugh quietly. "Buy one, get one free," he said, shaking his head. Funny how sometimes the best deals come when you take a risk. The path ahead was uncertain, full of challenges that only a man who knew the land and himself could face. But Tom Harris was ready. The horses were strong, spirited, and unpredictable, and that suited him just fine. After all, life on the ranch had taught him that sometimes the things that test you the most are the ones that bring the greatest rewards. By the time he reached his ranch, the town was a distant hum behind him. The horses walked calmly beside him now, their earlier curiosity replaced by tentative trust. Tom smiled to himself. This was only the beginning, and already he could sense the stories, lessons, and memories that would come from this moment. The deal had been made, the choice taken, and for Tom, the adventure had begun. And so, with the sun shining, the wind rustling through the tall grass, and the two Apache horses walking faithfully beside him, Tom Harris stepped into the first chapter of a story that no one in Red Valley would soon forget. The day had grown warmer by the time Tom Harris returned to his ranch, the morning sun now high in the sky and casting long shadows across the rolling hills. The two Apache horses followed quietly, their steps measured but still carrying an unmistakable energy. Tom could feel it in the tension of their muscles, the way their ears flicked at every sound. These were no ordinary horses. Each one had a mind of its own, and he knew that earning their trust would take more than a gentle pat or an occasional carrot. He walked to the gate of his ranch and swung it open, the familiar creak sounding like a greeting after a long journey. Beyond the gate, the wide expanse of his field stretched out, dotted with grazing cattle, a few haystacks, and the barns that had sheltered generations of animals before him. Tom led the horses slowly into the corral, allowing them to take in their new surroundings. The darker horse sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, while the chestnut one pawed at the dirt, stamping its hooves with impatience. Tom knew the first hours would be crucial. The horses were still strangers to him, and any sudden move could make them nervous, possibly even dangerous. He approached them calmly, lowering his voice to a gentle murmur. "Easy there," he said. "No need to rush. You'll get used to this place soon enough." His words seemed to reach the darker horse, which shifted slightly closer, its eyes curious but wary. The chestnut horse, however, let out a loud snort and tossed its head, clearly testing the boundaries of its new home. The neighbors began to notice the unusual sight. From the hill across the road, old Mr. Whitaker, a retired rancher with a lifetime of experience, watched Tom with his usual critical eye. "He's bitten off more than he can chew this time," he muttered to himself. "Two Apache. Most men can't handle one." But Tom didn't hear him. He had never been one to worry about what others thought, especially when it came to matters of skill and patience. Tom decided to start by giving the horses some space. He led them to the water trough, letting them drink at their own pace. The dark horse approached first, dipping its head and lapping the water carefully, while the chestnut horse watched from a distance, pawing the ground in thought. Tom stood a few steps away, his hands relaxed but ready, observing their behavior. He noticed small details, how the muscles in their necks tensed, the flick of their tails, the soft movements of their ears. These were signs, little clues about their personalities and temperaments. By late afternoon, Tom had begun to introduce them to the ranch more formally. He led them along the fence lines, showing them the boundaries and familiar landmarks. He knew that horses, especially spirited ones like these, needed to understand their environment before they could trust it. The darker horse began to follow him almost obediently, though still with a spark of independence. The chestnut, on the other hand, resisted at every turn, pulling back, testing Tom's patience and his ability to maintain calm authority. Tom realized that he needed a routine. Horses, much like people, thrived on predictability. So he set a schedule: feed them, lead them around the ranch, let them explore the corral, and then give them a few hours of rest. At first, the chestnut horse tried to assert itself at every step, rearing slightly and even attempting to bolt. But Tom stood his ground, his voice firm but kind. "Not today," he said. "We do this together." Slowly, the horse began to understand that resistance was pointless, and cooperation would earn it treats and praise. Evenings were quiet at the ranch, the golden light of the setting sun painting the fields in warm tones. Tom would sit by the stable, scratching the horses' necks and speaking softly to them. He found that this quiet time was as important as the training itself. Trust was built not only through commands, but through patience, kindness, and understanding. The darker horse began to nuzzle his shoulder gently, a sign of acceptance, while the chestnut horse, though still wary, would allow Tom to run his hand along its mane for a few precious moments. Over the next few days, Tom's routine became a rhythm that both man and horses came to rely on. He would wake before sunrise, check on the cattle, and then spend hours with the Apache. He discovered that each horse had unique strengths. The dark one was calm under pressure, able to follow commands even in tricky situations. The chestnut, while unpredictable, possessed incredible energy and speed, making it a perfect partner for challenging work on the trails. Tom realized that together, they could complement each other, and if he could master both, the combination would be unstoppable. Word of Tom's daring decision spread quickly through Red Valley. Children would sneak peeks over fences, whispering excitedly to each other about the crazy rancher who took two wild horses. Adults would stop by, offering advice or warnings. Some shook their heads, certain that Tom would fail. Others admired his courage, seeing in him the qualities of a true rancher who understood that life required both risk and reward. But Tom remained focused. He knew that no amount of gossip could prepare a horse or a rancher for the work ahead. One afternoon, a small incident tested Tom's patience more than any before. The chestnut horse, frustrated and restless, bolted across the field, throwing the reins against the wind. Tom chased after it, speaking firmly, his boots pounding the soft earth. For a tense moment, he feared the worst, imagining the horse escaping the ranch entirely. but his experience, instincts, and calm authority guided him. He caught up, held the reins securely, and gently but firmly brought the horse to a stop. The animal trembled slightly, but in that moment, Tom saw a glimmer of understanding in its eyes, a silent acknowledgement that he was not a threat, but a guide. That evening, as he tended to both horses in the stable, Tom reflected on what he had learned so far. Patience, he realized, was more than a virtue, it was a necessity. Every small victory, every moment of trust earned, was part of a larger journey. The horses were testing him as much as he was testing them, and in the quiet of the stable, he felt a connection forming. These were not just animals, they were companions, partners in a story that was still being written. Days turned into weeks, and the transformation became more evident. The horses began to follow Tom across the ranch, responding to his gestures and commands. The chestnut horse, once so unpredictable, started to anticipate his movements, learning when to slow down and when to respond. The darker horse, already obedient, now showed signs of affection, nuzzling Tom's shoulder in the mornings and waiting patiently by the gate when he finished his work. Tom felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not in conquering the horses, but in earning their trust and respect. Neighbors who had doubted him began to change their tune. Mr. Whittaker, who had watched from the hilltop, came down one afternoon to see for himself. "I'll be," he said, tipping his hat. "I didn't think you could do it, Tom. But you've done more than just handle them. You've earned their loyalty." Tom smiled, acknowledging the praise without a word of arrogance. He knew the work was far from over. Every day brought new challenges, but he also knew that with patience, determination, and understanding, nothing was impossible. By the end of the first month, the Apaches were no longer wild strangers. They were part of the ranch, part of the daily rhythm, and part of Tom's life. He had learned to read their moods, anticipate their reactions, and guide them through both calm days and challenging ones. Each morning, he would greet them with a smile, feeling the spark of energy that had first caught his attention at the trading post. Each evening, he would rest beside them, sharing quiet moments that deepened the bond between man and horse. Tom realized something important. It wasn't just about taming the horses. It was about understanding them, respecting them, and working together as a team. The buy one, get one free deal had seemed like a simple opportunity, a quirky sign in a small-town trading post. But it had turned into a journey of patience, learning, and connection. And for Tom Harris, that journey was only beginning. As he looked across the ranch, watching the two horses graze side by side under the warm afternoon sun, he felt a quiet pride. Not in owning them, but in the work, the patience, and the understanding that had brought them to this point. The challenge was far from over, but Tom knew one thing for certain. Together, they were unstoppable. The sun rose over Red Valley in brilliant shades of gold and orange, casting long shadows across Tom Harris's ranch. After weeks of careful routines, small victories, and quiet moments of trust, he knew that the real test with the Apache horses had only just begun. The first part of the journey had been about observation, patience, and understanding. Now came the phase that would truly test his skills, training, bonding, and guiding two spirited, unpredictable animals at the same time. Tom began the morning with the familiar steps, checking on the cattle, opening the barn doors, and greeting his two horses. The darker horse nuzzled his shoulder immediately, a sign that trust had grown stronger. The chestnut horse, however, pawed the ground impatiently, tossing its mane, restless and eager to assert its energy. Tom knew this was the stage where many ranchers failed. One wrong move, a moment of frustration, and the bond they had begun to build could be broken. He started the day with simple exercises, walking the horses around the corral, letting them respond to his gentle voice and hand signals, was a small step but necessary. The dark horse followed his lead almost seamlessly, while the chestnut resisted, circling, kicking up dust, and occasionally letting out a loud neigh that echoed across the valley. Tom didn't raise his voice. He slowed his pace, maintaining calm authority. "Easy there," he said softly, moving deliberately. "We do this together, not apart." Neighbors began to watch again, some curious, others skeptical. Children whispered to each other as they peered over fences. "Do you think he can do it?" one asked. "2 horses at the same time." "That's impossible." But Tom ignored the crowd. He had never let opinions of others dictate his actions, especially when it came to something as personal as working with animals. By mid-morning, Tom decided it was time to test the horses' obedience under more challenging conditions. He led them out of the corral and toward the open fields where the cattle grazed. The dark horse walked beside him calmly, but the chestnut started to act up. It darted sideways, tried to bolt, and even let out an alarmed whinny. Tom's heart remained steady. He knew that horses like these could sense fear or anger, and any hint of either would make the situation worse. Slowly, calmly, he guided the chestnut horse back into line, using soft words, gentle pressure on the reins, and small rewards when it responded correctly. Hours passed like this, a delicate dance of patience and skill. Tom learned to anticipate the horse's moods. He noticed that the chestnut horse responded best after it had time to release energy, running in short bursts, then calming down before being asked to follow commands. The dark horse, while easier to guide, required constant attention to maintain its focus. Tom's experience with cattle taught him to read behavior, to see signals before problems arose. Now, he applied that knowledge to the horses, carefully adjusting his methods to each animal's personality. By afternoon, the sun had climbed high, and Tom decided to introduce the horses to the trails beyond the ranch. The terrain was rough, filled with hidden dips, rocks, and sudden changes in elevation. Riding or guiding one horse through such paths was difficult enough, but 2 meant that Tom had to think ahead, predict reactions, and remain fully alert at every step. The dark horse followed closely, its gait steady and reliable. The chestnut horse, full of energy and curiosity, tested him with sudden leaps, changes in direction, and occasional attempts to run ahead. Tom spoke softly as he guided them, praising small successes. "Good job," he said when the chestnut horse responded correctly. "See, you can do it." Every moment of trust earned was like a small victory, a confirmation that the work was paying off. By the time they returned to the ranch, both horses had been tested, and though exhausted, they were calmer, more responsive, and more willing to follow Tom's lead. Evenings were spent in quiet reflection. Tom would sit near the stable, brushing the horses' coats, speaking gently, and letting the animals rest. These moments were just as important as training exercises. The horses needed to know that their rancher was not only a guide but also a companion who understood them, respected them, and would not push them beyond their limits. Slowly, the bond deepened. The chestnut horse, once so wild and defiant, began to approach Tom willingly, nudging his hand for a scratch or a gentle pat. One morning, a challenge arose that tested Tom in ways he hadn't anticipated. A storm was approaching, with dark clouds rolling across the valley and strong winds rattling the barns. The horses became nervous, their senses heightened by the change in weather. The chestnut horse bolted toward the fence, while the dark horse stamped its hooves and neighed loudly. Tom acted quickly, keeping his voice calm, and even as he moved to secure the animals. He guided them to the shelter of the barn, using the reins carefully and relying on the trust they had begun to build. By the time the storm hit, the horses were safe, huddled in the stable, their fear eased by Tom's steady presence. This incident taught Tom an important lesson. Leadership with animals was not just about skill or patience. It was about timing, understanding, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. The horses looked to him not just for commands, but for reassurance, especially when the world around them became unpredictable. He realized that every challenge, every moment of resistance, was an opportunity to strengthen the connection between human and animal. Over the next several days, Tom continued to push boundaries. He introduced new exercises, led the horses to unfamiliar pastures, and practiced guiding them over small obstacles. Each time, he observed their reactions, noting what worked and what didn't. Slowly but surely, the chestnut horse became more predictable, less prone to sudden bursts of energy, and more willing to follow instructions. The dark horse, already steady, became even more responsive, demonstrating a remarkable intelligence and understanding that made Tom proud. Neighbors began to take notice again, but this time with admiration rather than doubt. Some came by to offer advice, while others simply watched from a distance, fascinated by the transformation taking place at Tom's ranch. Children would run alongside the fence, waving, as Tom guided the horses around the fields. The town slowly began to talk about the rancher who tamed 2 wild Apaches, though Tom himself paid little attention to the chatter. For him, the work, the learning, and the connection with the horses were what mattered most. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Tom reflected on the journey so far. The horses had changed, yes, but he had changed as well. Patience had become more than a tool, it was a part of his being. Observation had become instinct, and trust, both given and received, had grown stronger than he had ever imagined. The chestnut horse, once wild and defiant, now nuzzled his shoulder as he brushed its mane. The dark horse leaned gently into his side, a silent affirmation of the bond they shared. Tom realized that the real challenge was not in controlling the horses, but in understanding them. Each animal had a personality, a temperament, and a way of seeing the world. By learning to read these signals, to anticipate reactions, and to respond calmly and wisely, he had turned potential chaos into harmony. What had seemed like a simple deal at the trading post, buy one, get one free, had become a journey of discovery, patience, and profound connection. By the end of Part 3, the ranch was no longer just a place of work. It had become a space of learning, trust, and mutual respect. Tom knew that the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, difficult trails, unexpected events, and moments that would test both his skills and his patience. But he also knew that he and the Apache horses had already come far, and together they were capable of facing whatever came next. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle above Red Valley, Tom stood outside the stable, watching the horses rest peacefully. The wind whispered through the tall grass, and the distant sound of cattle settling in for the night reminded him of the rhythm of life on the ranch. A quiet satisfaction settled over him. The challenge had been great, the work exhausting, but the reward was deeper than he could have imagined. The horses trusted him, followed him, and even in their own way understood him. And in that moment, Tom Harris knew one thing clearly. The adventure with the Apache was not just about taming wild horses. It was about courage, patience, understanding, and the quiet victories that came from facing challenges head-on. Each day brought new lessons, new obstacles, and new triumphs. And together, man and horses were ready to face them all. Weeks had passed since Tom Harris first brought the 2 Apache horses to his ranch. The mornings now began with a familiar rhythm, the sound of birdsong, the soft rustle of grass in the breeze, and the quiet anticipation of the horses waiting for him by the stable. By now, the dark horse had become calm and reliable, responding to every gesture and voice command with intelligence and grace. The chestnut horse, once so fiery and unpredictable, had transformed as well. Though it still carried a spark of energy, it now approached Tom with trust rather than defiance, eager to follow his lead and learn from him. The real change, however, was not only in the horses. Tom had learned as much about himself as he had about them. He had discovered a patience he hadn't realized he possessed, a steady confidence that came from observation, understanding, and consistency. Each day on the ranch became a lesson in communication, not words, but gestures, tone, and respect. Tom had realized that the bond with the horses was more than just training. It was a partnership, one that required mutual trust, respect, and recognition of each other's strengths. One morning, after checking the fences and feeding the cattle, Tom decided it was time to put the horses to work. The fields were wide, the cattle scattered across the hills, and the ranch needed careful attention. The dark horse, steady and strong, followed obediently as Tom led it toward the first group of cattle. The chestnut horse, full of energy, pranced alongside, eager to join the task but careful to remain under Tom's guidance. The sight of the two horses moving together, under the direction of a single rider, was remarkable. It was clear that the training had not only worked, but had created a bond that allowed them to anticipate each other's actions. Tom began with simple herding exercises. He would guide the horses through the fields, directing them to move the cattle from one area to another. The dark horse responded immediately to subtle shifts in weight or gentle tug of the reins, while the chestnut horse, now more disciplined, followed instructions with surprising accuracy. Each successful movement was a quiet celebration. Tom knew that these were not just animals obeying commands. They were thinking, responding, and learning to work as a team. As days turned into weeks, the horses became an essential part of daily ranch life. Tom could send them ahead to guide a stubborn cow back into the pen, or rely on them to navigate the trickiest trails safely. He noticed small behaviors that marked their growing intelligence. The dark horse would sometimes move slightly ahead when it sensed danger, while the chestnut horse learned to stay close to Tom during tight turns, resisting the temptation to bolt or run off. These subtle signs of awareness filled Tom with pride. He realized that his patience and consistent training had transformed two wild, unpredictable horses into partners he could trust in every situation. Neighbors in Red Valley began to take notice more than ever. Stories spread quickly through the small town about Tom's skill and determination. Some came to watch, hoping to learn, while others were simply amazed at what they saw. Children would wave excitedly as Tom rode the horses across the fields, and older ranchers often stopped by, shaking their heads in admiration. One day, Mr. Whitaker, the retired rancher who had once doubted Tom, came over and said, I didn't think anyone could handle two Apaches at once. But you've not only handled them, you've earned their trust, and that's something most men couldn't do in a lifetime. Tom simply nodded, appreciating the praise but focusing on the work ahead. The bond between Tom and the horses deepened further as he began to teach them more advanced skills. He introduced small obstacles in the pasture, fallen logs, shallow ditches, and narrow paths lined with stones. At first, the chestnut horse hesitated, testing its boundaries, while the dark horse moved confidently, following Tom's lead. Slowly, the chestnut learned to approach each obstacle with caution and awareness, responding to gentle guidance rather than reacting out of fear or stubbornness. Each new skill reinforced the connection between human and animal, creating a sense of teamwork that could not be achieved through force or dominance. Evenings were a time of reflection and quiet bonding. Tom would sit near the stables, brushing their coats and speaking softly. The horses, now relaxed in his presence, would nuzzle his shoulder or lower their heads in contentment. Tom often thought about the journey that had brought them here. The moment he first saw the "buy one, get one free" sign, the initial chaos and resistance, and the countless hours of patience and practice that had followed. He realized that the true reward was not ownership of the horses, but the deep understanding and connection he had cultivated with them. One particularly memorable afternoon, Tom decided to take the horses on a longer trail that wound through the hills surrounding the ranch. The path was narrow, steep in places, and filled with loose rocks and unexpected turns. Many inexperienced riders would have avoided such a challenge, but Tom knew that this was the next step in building confidence and teamwork. The dark horse led the way, carefully placing each hoof, while the chestnut horse followed, trusting Tom's guidance and learning to navigate the tricky terrain without panic. It was a test not just of their skill, but of the bond they had formed. By the end of the trail, the horses were tired but calm, and Tom felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The community's admiration continued to grow. Local farmers and ranchers would sometimes ask for advice or guidance, curious about how Tom had managed to train two such challenging horses so successfully. Tom was generous with his knowledge, always emphasizing patience, understanding, and respect for the animals. He told them, "It's not about control, it's about trust. You have to earn it day by day." People began to see him as not just a skilled rancher, but a teacher and example of what dedication and compassion could achieve. Life on the ranch became more harmonious with the two Apache horses fully integrated into daily work. Tom could rely on them for herding, transporting supplies, or navigating difficult terrain. They had become an extension of his skills, each horse complementing the other in ways that seemed almost instinctual. The dark horse provided steady guidance, while the chestnut horse added energy and speed when needed. Together, they allowed Tom to accomplish tasks that would have been difficult alone, creating a sense of partnership that went beyond the ordinary ranching experience. Through it all, Tom never lost sight of the lessons he had learned in the early days. Patience, observation, and respect were key. He understood that pushing the horses too hard or reacting in frustration would undo weeks of trust. Each success, each moment of cooperation, was earned through consistent, thoughtful effort. And in return, the horses gave him loyalty, intelligence, and companionship that went far beyond simple obedience. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Tom stood outside the stable and watched his horses graze. The dark horse flicked its ears, alert but calm, while the chestnut moved with a new sense of balance and confidence. Tom felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not in conquering wild animals, but in building a bond of mutual respect and understanding. He knew that the journey had been worth every challenge, every moment of frustration, and every lesson learned. The story of Tom and his Apache horses had begun as a curious, almost whimsical choice, a buy one, get one free deal at a trading post. But through patience, courage, and dedication, it had become something much greater, a living example of partnership, trust, and the rewards of daring to take on a challenge that others would avoid. Tom smiled to himself, thinking of how far they had come, and knew that the final chapters of this story, the true test of their bond and their skill, were still ahead. As night fell, the ranch grew quiet. The cattle settled in the fields, the wind rustled through the tall grass, and the two Apache horses stood side by side near the stable. Tom, tired but content, patted their necks gently, feeling the steady warmth of their bodies and the calm rhythm of their breathing. He reflected on the journey so far, grateful for the lessons learned and the connection built. In the silence of the night, under a sky filled with stars, Tom Harris and his two horses had become a team, ready for whatever challenges and adventures lay ahead. Time had passed, and the small town of Red Valley had long begun to speak of Tom Harris and his two Apache horses with admiration and respect. What had once seemed like a whimsical decision at a trading post, a buy one, get one free deal, had transformed into a story of courage, patience, and exceptional skill. Tom, who had always been a modest man, rarely spoke about his achievements, but everyone in town could see the results. The horses, once wild and defiant, now moved with precision, grace, and a deep trust in the man who had earned their loyalty. The daily life of the ranch had changed in remarkable ways. The Apache horses had become not just companions but partners in every aspect of Tom's work. With their strength, intelligence, and energy, tasks that once took hours could now be accomplished more efficiently. Herding cattle became smoother. Guiding stubborn or frightened animals across difficult terrain was now almost effortless. Tom's work was no longer solitary. Wherever he went, the two horses moved alongside him, each complementing the other and each responding to subtle gestures and silent commands. One bright morning, Tom decided to take the horses on an extended ride through the valley. The trails were rugged and steep in parts, winding through hills, forests, and open fields. The dark horse led with confidence, its steady pace allowing Tom to navigate tricky terrain safely. The chestnut horse, energetic and responsive, moved alongside, anticipating turns and adjusting its speed as needed. The journey was more than a test of their physical abilities. It was a demonstration of the trust and understanding that had developed over weeks and months. As they rode, Tom reflected on the lessons he had learned from the horses. Patience was more than a tool, it had become a way of life. Observing the smallest details, the flick of an ear, the tension in a muscle, the subtle movement of a tail, had taught him how to communicate without words. He realized that trust was earned not through control but through consistency, respect, and care. These lessons had changed not only his approach to animals but his perspective on life. Word of Tom's extraordinary work with the Apache horses continued to spread. Travelers passing through Red Valley often stopped by, curious to witness the famed horses in action. Some came from distant towns, hoping to learn from Tom's methods, while others simply wanted to see the remarkable animals that had once been so wild and untamable. Children in particular were fascinated, following him along the fences and whispering excitedly about the stories they had heard. Tom welcomed the attention quietly, never seeking fame, but understanding that his work had become an inspiration for others. One afternoon, a challenge arose that put everything to the test. A herd of cattle had wandered farther than usual, and a sudden storm threatened to make the task of guiding them back to safety more dangerous. The sky darkened, winds picked up, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Tom acted quickly, mounting the dark horse while guiding the chestnut from the reins. The horses responded instinctively, moving with precision and caution as they led the cattle across slippery ground, through narrow paths and over shallow streams. Their training, trust, and bond were evident in every movement. By the time the storm passed, all the cattle were safe, and the town would later speak of this day as proof of Tom and his horses' unmatched skill and courage. Life continued on the ranch, and the partnership between Tom and the Apache horses grew stronger every day. The dark horse had proven to be a reliable leader, calm under pressure, and capable of handling any situation with focus and intelligence. The chestnut horse, once considered unpredictable, now demonstrated courage, energy, and loyalty. Together, they allowed Tom to accomplish work that once seemed impossible. Beyond their usefulness, they had become true companions, sharing quiet moments in the stable, grazing side by side in the fields, or simply standing with him at sunset, watching the valley bathe in golden light. Tom's achievements did not go unnoticed by the community. Local ranchers began to seek his advice, eager to learn the techniques he had developed through experience, patience, and observation. Children asked questions about the horses, wanting to understand their behavior and learn how to care for them. Tom answered patiently, sharing his knowledge and encouraging others to treat animals with respect, understanding, and kindness. In doing so, he became not only a respected rancher but also a mentor, demonstrating that courage, patience, and intelligence could overcome even the most challenging obstacles. One evening, Tom rode the horses to the top of a hill overlooking his ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The wind whispered through the tall grass, and the distant sound of cattle settling in the fields added a sense of calm to the scene. Tom looked at the two horses, standing proudly beside him. The dark horse nuzzled his shoulder gently, while the chestnut lowered its head, eyes soft and trusting. In that moment, Tom felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The journey had been long, the challenges great, but the rewards, trust, partnership, and mutual respect were beyond anything he could have imagined. Reflecting on the journey from the moment he had first seen the "buy one, get one free" sign at the trading post, Tom realized that life often presented opportunities in unexpected ways. At first glance, the deal had seemed simple, even humorous. But it had been a turning point, an invitation to take a risk, embrace challenge, and grow in ways he had never anticipated. The Apache horses had not only tested his skill and patience, they had taught him about dedication, understanding, and the quiet power of trust. Tom's story became a legend in Red Valley. People spoke of the rancher who had taken on two wild Apache and turned them into loyal, intelligent companions. The horses became part of the town's identity, symbols of courage, patience, and perseverance. Visitors often asked to see them, and Tom welcomed them not to boast, but to demonstrate that true skill came from careful observation, consistent effort, and respect for the animals in one's care. As time passed, the ranch flourished. With the Apache horses assisting in every aspect of the work, tasks became more manageable, and the land prospered under Tom's careful stewardship. Yet the true measure of success was not in the size of the herds or the acres of land. It was in the connection between human and animal, the bond that had transformed two wild horses into partners, and the way in which trust, patience, and courage could create harmony in even the most challenging circumstances. One morning, Tom stood at the edge of the corral, watching the horses move gracefully across the field. The dark horse led confidently, while the chestnut followed closely, moving with energy and awareness. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunity, for the lessons learned, and for the companionship of the animals that had become such an integral part of his life. The town, the neighbors, and the visitors who had once doubted his ability now looked on with admiration, understanding that what Tom had accomplished was the result of persistence, understanding, and a willingness to embrace challenge rather than avoid it. Even after the work of the day was done, Tom would spend hours with the horses, brushing their coats, speaking gently, and sharing quiet moments of reflection. The connection had grown beyond practical necessity. It was now a relationship built on trust, respect, and genuine affection. The horses were no longer simply animals to be managed. They were companions, partners, and teachers in their own right, showing Tom lessons about patience, communication, and the rewards of perseverance. As the final light of the day faded and stars began to appear in the clear night sky, Tom stood quietly, looking at the two horses resting near the stable. The wind carried the faint sound of distant cattle, the rustle of leaves, and the soft breathing of the animals beside him. He knew that the story that had begun with a simple deal at a trading post had become something far greater, a story of courage, patience, understanding, and the profound rewards that come from facing challenges head-on. The "buy one, get one free" sign had been the beginning, but the journey had been the real reward. Tom had taken both horses, embraced the challenge, and in doing so, had created a partnership that would endure for years to come. The story of Tom Harris and his Apache horses became a lesson for everyone who heard it. Opportunities may appear simple, but the true reward lies in courage, patience, and the willingness to work hard, understand, and grow alongside those we choose to trust. And so, under the starry night of Red Valley, Tom Harris stood with his two Apache horses, knowing that together they had faced challenges, built trust, and forged a bond that would last a lifetime. The adventure that had begun with curiosity and courage had become a legacy of perseverance, understanding, and the enduring power of connection between humans and animals. Tom smiled quietly, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment that few could ever understand, knowing that this story, this journey, would be remembered long after the sun rose again over the rolling hills of his beloved ranch.